Can you believe it? One of the most iconic places in Washington, D.C., the Tidal Basin is getting a $113 million makeover. But here's the twist. It's not just a regular renovation. It's a rescue mission for a beloved national treasure that's been fighting a losing battle against sinking seawalls and rising sea levels. What exactly is changing, and how will this makeover shape the future of one of America's most scenic spots? By the end of this video, you'll know why this isn't just another construction project.
Looks poorly saturated, the soil.
We expect construction to begin later this spring.
It's a complete transformation with deep implications. Let's take a look. Before we dive into the details, let's take a step back. The Tidal Basin wasn't always a tourist hub. Back in the late 1800s, when it was built, it served a pretty practical purpose: to help regulate the water levels in the Potomac River and protect Washington's new infrastructure from flooding. Over time, as the city grew, the Tidal Basin became much more than that. It evolved into a cherished public space, home to the National Cherry Blossom Festival and some of the nation's most iconic monuments. It became a symbol of Washington itself. But here's the problem. Like anything built over a century ago, it has aged, and not gracefully. The seawalls, originally meant to keep water out, are now letting it in. Decades of patchwork repairs have been made, but they didn't tackle the real issue: the sinking foundation. And now sections of the seawalls have sunk by as much as 5 feet. Water flows over them twice a day during normal high tides. Can you imagine that? Twice a day. The infrastructure is literally collapsing under the pressure of time and rising sea levels. So how do you fund a massive restoration like this? Enter the Great American Outdoors Act, passed in 2020. Now, this isn't just a regular piece of legislation. It's a game changer for projects like the Tidal Basin. The act provides up to $1.3 billion annually for national parks, which had been struggling with a huge maintenance backlog. And thanks to this funding, the National Park Service can finally tackle the $113 million renovation that the Tidal Basin desperately needs. Think about this for a moment. For years, the Tidal Basin and other parks across the U.S. have been in a state of disrepair. This act changed everything. Suddenly, there's money available to not only preserve these spaces, but also to future-proof them against the challenges of climate change. And the Tidal Basin? It's at the top of the list. Without this funding, it's doubtful that such a large-scale project could have ever happened. Now let's talk about what's actually going to happen. When we say $113 million worth of renovations, what does that mean? Well, the focus of the project is on rebuilding the seawalls around the Tidal Basin and the Potomac River in West Potomac Park. In total, over 6,800 linear feet of seawall will be repaired or replaced. But it's not just about fixing what's broken. This is a chance to adapt to the future. One of the primary goals is to ensure that the Tidal Basin can withstand the rising tides for at least the next 100 years. The current walls weren't designed for today's climate, let alone tomorrow's. That's why engineers are planning to elevate the seawalls to new heights literally. They're also focusing on making the area more accessible for everyone, including people with disabilities. And don't worry, the beloved cherry trees are being taken into consideration too. More on that later. Why is all this necessary? The sinking seawalls. It's hard to overstate how big of an issue this is. These walls were built over 100 years ago without anchoring them into bedrock. As a result, they've been sinking slowly but steadily. Some areas have dropped by as much as 5 feet, and this isn't just a minor inconvenience. When high tides roll in, water floods over the walls twice a day. It's not safe for visitors, and it's wreaking havoc on the surrounding landscape, including the cherry trees that make the Tidal Basin famous. And here's the kicker. Even with past repair efforts, none of the solutions have lasted. That's because they were all short-term fixes that didn't address the underlying issue of the sinking foundation. This new project, it's going to the root of the problem. There's another issue that's making things even worse: rising sea levels. It's not just that the seawalls are sinking, the water levels are rising too. Climate change is having a very real impact on the Tidal Basin, and the seawalls that were designed in the 1800s are no match for today's environmental conditions. What's the solution? Engineers are taking future sea levels into account. The new seawalls will be elevated up to 5.5 feet in some areas, making them much better equipped to handle storm surges and rising tides. And that's not all. These new walls are being designed so they can be raised even higher if needed in the future. It's forward thinking, and it's all about making sure the tidal basin remains safe and accessible for generations to come. Construction has already begun, and the first phase is all about preparation. Starting in late 2024, workers will set up construction zones, remove old structures, and start clearing the way for the big work ahead. Now here's the part that might make you cringe. About 140 cherry trees will have to be removed to make room for the repairs. But before you panic, there's good news. For every tree removed, more will be replanted. In fact, by the time the project is finished, 274 new cherry trees will take root around the tidal basin. So yes, there will be a temporary loss, but the long-term gain will more than make up for it. The real work begins with the seawalls. To fix the sinking problem once and for all, engineers are going deep literally. They're using 90 to 110-foot pilings drilled into bedrock. These pilings will form the foundation of the new seawalls, ensuring they won't sink again, no matter how much time passes. It's not just about stopping the sinking, though. The walls are also being elevated to handle future sea level rise. And in case the sea levels continue to rise even more than expected, the walls are designed so they can be extended upwards. It's an incredibly technical process, but the result will be a seawall that can last for at least another century. Preserving the historic charm of the tidal basin is one of the central goals of this renovation. You see, this place isn't just about cherry blossoms and reflecting pools. It's a living piece of history filled with landmarks that define Washington, D.C., as much as the Capitol or the White House. Imagine standing by the Jefferson Memorial, knowing that every stone in the seawall has a story to tell. That's exactly what the National Park Service, NPS, aims to protect. Here's the deal. They're not just tearing down the old seawalls and slapping up new ones. No, they're going to great lengths to ensure that the new construction honors the original design. The stones from the existing seawalls will be salvaged, cleaned, and reused in the new structure wherever possible. This means the tidal basin's historical look and feel won't be lost to modern engineering. Instead, it will be enhanced, reinforced, and made ready for the next century. In fact, one of the main reasons this project is so expensive and complex is precisely because of this commitment to history. It would be much easier to bulldoze the whole thing and start fresh. But that's not the point. The tidal basin is a place where past, present, and future meet. And the NPS is determined to preserve that delicate balance. When visitors come to see the cherry blossoms or the memorials, they won't just see a park, they'll feel like they're stepping back into history with the security of knowing that history is now protected for generations to come. The tidal basin is one of the most visited spots in Washington, D.C., attracting millions of visitors each year. It's a favorite for tourists and locals alike, offering scenic views, walking paths, and of course, the world-famous cherry blossoms in the spring. But here's the problem. The pathways that wind around the basin aren't exactly user-friendly, especially for those with mobility issues. If you've ever been there on a crowded day or during the Cherry Blossom Festival, you know how tight and uneven some of those walkways can get. It can feel like an obstacle course, especially for families with strollers or people in wheelchairs. That's why accessibility is such a major focus of this renovation. The walkways are being widened and regraded to make them smoother, more even, and easier to navigate. Picture this: wide, accessible paths where you don't have to dodge puddles or navigate steep inclines. Whether you're out for a peaceful stroll, a jog, or visiting with young kids in tow, the new paths are designed to accommodate everyone. What's more, the redesign also takes into account the expected increase in visitors over the coming years. It's not just about fixing what's broken, it's about making sure the tidal basin can comfortably welcome the next generation of tourists, cherry blossom enthusiasts, and history buffs. And yes, while there will be some construction barriers and detours in the short term, these changes mean a better, more accessible experience for everyone in the future. This renovation isn't just about concrete and construction crews. It's also about protecting the delicate environment that makes the tidal basin so special. The cherry trees, the wildlife, the water, all of these elements come together to form a unique ecosystem that needs careful management, especially during a large-scale renovation like this. The biggest environmental issue facing the tidal basin has been poor drainage. For years, excess water has been flooding the walkways and damaging the cherry trees' roots. These trees, which are a central part of the National Cherry Blossom Festival, are more than just beautiful, they're an integral part of the area's ecosystem. Waterlogging from poor drainage has put their health at risk, and with rising sea levels, the situation was only getting worse. But the renovation is designed to change all that. New drainage systems will be installed, ensuring that rainwater and tidal surges are properly managed and directed away from the trees and pathways. This means that not only will the walkways be drier and safer for visitors, but the cherry trees will have a better chance to thrive. These improvements aren't just cosmetic, they're critical for the long-term health of the entire ecosystem. And it's not just about the cherry trees. The planners have also taken care to ensure that the local wildlife isn't disrupted by the construction. Birds, fish, and other animals that call the tidal basin home will continue to do so, with minimal interference from the renovation. This project is about finding that perfect balance between human use and environmental preservation. And when it's all said and done, the tidal basin will be healthier and more resilient than ever before. The National Cherry Blossom Festival. If you've ever had the chance to attend, you know just how magical it can be. Every spring, thousands of cherry trees burst into bloom, covering the tidal basin in a blanket of delicate pink and white flowers. It's a sight that draws more than 1.5 million visitors each year. But here's the burning question. How is this massive construction project going to affect one of the biggest annual events in Washington, D.C.? Rest assured, the National Park Service has gone to great lengths to ensure that the festival experience won't be ruined. Yes, some cherry trees will need to be removed during the renovation, but don't panic, many more will be replanted. In fact, by the time the project is complete, 274 new cherry trees will be added to the landscape, ensuring that future festivals are even more spectacular than before. Even during construction, the festival will go on. Temporary pathways will be set up so that visitors can still stroll around the basin and enjoy the cherry blossoms. The most popular viewing spots will remain open, and the festival's signature events, like the Blossom Kite Festival and the Cherry Blossom Parade, will still take place. So while there may be some detours and barriers during the renovation, the festival isn't going anywhere. In fact, it's only going to get better. By 2026, when the renovation is finished, the tidal basin will not only be more beautiful, but it will also be better equipped to handle the festival crowds. With wider pathways, improved accessibility, and more cherry trees than ever before, the festival will continue to be a highlight of springtime in Washington, D.C. for decades to come. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. You might be wondering how long this is all going to take. After all, a $113 million renovation doesn't happen overnight. The project is already underway, but it's being carefully phased to minimize disruption and keep the tidal basin open to visitors throughout the process. Most of the heavy lifting, rebuilding the seawalls, improving the drainage systems, and widening the pathways will take place between now and 2026. The big goal? To have the major work done by 2026, just in time for the 250th anniversary of American independence. That's when the tidal basin will need to be ready for the expected influx of visitors who will come to Washington, D.C. to celebrate this historic milestone. But that doesn't mean the work stops there. Some of the final touches, particularly along the Potomac River seawalls, will continue into 2027. In the meantime, visitors won't be completely shut out. The project is being done in stages, which means that parts of the basin will remain open while construction happens in other areas. You'll still be able to visit, take in the sights, and enjoy the cherry blossoms, even if there's a bit of scaffolding in the background. By 2026, the tidal basin will emerge from its transformation stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful than ever. One of the key goals of the National Park Service during this renovation is transparency. They know that people care deeply about the tidal basin and want to stay informed about what's happening. That's why there will be regular updates available throughout the project. Whether you're a local who visits the basin regularly or someone planning a future trip to DC, You'll be able to keep up with the latest news on the progress of the renovation. In fact, the Park Service has made it a priority to gather public feedback and address concerns as the project moves forward. They're committed to making sure the renovation is done in a way that respects both the history of the site and the needs of the community. So if you have any concerns, questions, or ideas, the Park Service is listening. This open communication isn't just about keeping the public informed, it's about building trust. The Tidal Basin is a national treasure, and the renovation is a massive undertaking. By keeping the public in the loop, the Park Service hopes to ensure that everyone feels like they're part of the process. After all, the Tidal Basin belongs to all of us, and we all have a stake in its future. One of the most forward-thinking aspects of this renovation is how it's preparing the Tidal Basin for the future. Rising sea levels are a real concern, especially in areas like Washington, D.C., that are close to large bodies of water. The engineers working on this project aren't just fixing the current issues. They're planning for what's to come. The new seawalls are designed to withstand not just today's high tides, but the higher tides that are expected in the future. The walls will be elevated to 5.5 feet in some areas, giving them the strength to hold back rising waters. And if needed, the walls can be raised even further down the line. This future-proofing ensures that the Tidal Basin will remain a safe and beautiful place for generations to come, no matter how the climate changes. The timing of this renovation is no coincidence. It's all part of a broader plan to prepare Washington, D.C. for the 250th anniversary of American independence in 2026. The Tidal Basin is just one of many areas getting a makeover ahead of this historic celebration. The National Mall, the monuments, and the surrounding parks are all being improved and revitalized to make sure they're ready for the millions of visitors who will come to celebrate the country's milestone birthday. By the time 2026 rolls around, the Tidal Basin will be transformed. It'll be stronger, more accessible, and more resilient. And it will be ready to shine as one of the crown jewels of the nation's capital during this historic celebration. Can you imagine how amazing it will be to visit the Tidal Basin in 2026, knowing that you're standing in a place that's been prepared to last for another century? But the Tidal Basin isn't the only place getting a facelift. In fact, there are over $500 million in additional improvements planned for the National Mall. This includes everything from upgrading the walkways and landscaping to ensuring better drainage and flood protection for the monuments and memorials that surround the Tidal Basin. These improvements aren't just about making the area look nicer. They're about making sure that one of the most visited public spaces in the world remains accessible and enjoyable for future generations. The National Mall is a living, breathing part of American history, and these improvements will ensure that it remains a place where people can gather, reflect, and celebrate for years to come. What's happening at the Tidal Basin right now is more than just a renovation. It's a transformation one that will protect this national treasure from the effects of time, climate change, and rising tides. With $113 million dedicated to the project, the Tidal Basin will emerge stronger, more accessible, and more beautiful than ever before. As we look ahead to 2026 and beyond, the changes happening here are setting the stage for an exciting future. The Tidal Basin will remain a place where history and nature come together in perfect harmony, and it'll be ready to welcome visitors from around the world for many more years to come. What do you think? Will the new Tidal Basin become an even more iconic destination? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon for more updates. Don't forget to share this video with friends who love history and architecture. Stay tuned for more fascinating stories from Washington, D.C. and beyond.